واتقوا الله ويعلمكم الله والله بكل شيء عليم.
Now let's move on to al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah. So al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah is not exactly the same. The principles of fiqh are not the same as usul al-fiqh. You'll see that al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah, they come after al-Qawa'id al-Usuliyah. So usul al-fiqh comes before Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah in terms of the history of it. Because for you to come about with the Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah, you have to have a lot of rulings that look the same. And when you have all of these rulings that look the same, a principle is extracted from that. So for example, لا ضرر ولا ضرار, or الأمور بمقاصدها, or المشقة تجلب التيسير. These principles, first of all, before these principles were extracted, you would have a قاعدة أصولية, right? So for example, you'd have الأمر يقتضي الوجوب, right? So al-amr, a command, shows an obligation. And then you would have to have an evidence to apply that to. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, and establish the prayer. Allah commanded us to establish the prayer. And a command shows an obligation. So the ruling from this is, there's an obligation, right? So what the scholars did, after they gathered rulings that looked similar, they extracted a principle that relates to all of these rulings. And they call that a قاعدة فقهية, right? And قواعد فقهية, principles of fiqh, are different types. You have قواعد الكلية الكبرى, قواعد الكلية غير الكبرى, قواعد الكلية الصغرى, and you have الضوابط الفقهية. And inshallah ta'ala we'll explain that at a different time, a different date, inshallah ta'ala. But now let's just talk about how a person, طالب العلم, can go about studying القواعد الفقهية. So generally, most طلاب العلم today, what they do is, when they want to study al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah, even though the best time and the way you'll really benefit from Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah is through studying books of fiqh, because you'll see how it's implemented and how the scholars implement it and how they derive rulings through it. But generally what Tulab al-Ilm do today is, and what they've been doing for a long time, is they also study it in books that have specific principles, that mention these principles in specific books. So what they do is, they would generally start with منظومة القواعد الفقهية, the poem القواعد الفقهية by Shaykh Abdurrahman Nasir Sa'di. They would memorize that, study it properly. One of the explanations I would really recommend is Shaykh Khalid al-Mashaykh's explanation. It's very beneficial. And then they would move on to a more intermediate level book. So I'll just give you an example. Maybe you can then move on to Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah's poem. It's a bit more detailed, a little bit more advanced, mentions certain principles, quite a few principles actually, that are not mentioned in the poem of Shaykh Abdurrahman Nasir Sa'di. Try and go through a sharh, an explanation of it. I would recommend Shaykh Khalid al-Mashaykh's explanation as well. There are other explanations. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen himself explained it. And then you can maybe move on to Al-Qawa'id wal-Usul al-Jami'ah by Shaykh Abdurrahman Nasir Sa'di. Shaykh Khalid al-Mashayikh also has an explanation on that. I would highly recommend it. And then you can maybe move on to Qawa'id ibn Rajab and benefit from it. See how Ibn Rajab applies these principles to certain masail, furu' fiqhiyah. And one thing I would recommend is, try and pick a book in Qawa'id fiqhiyah that's in line with the book of fiqh that you're studying, in line with the madhab that you're studying. So if you're studying Shafi'i fiqh, look for books in Qawa'id fiqhiyah written by ulama of the Shafi'i madhab. Maybe you want to pick Al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir by As-Suyuti, or Al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir by As-Subki. If you're Hanafi, do the same. If you're Maliki, do the same. Because you'll benefit a lot more than if you were, for example, studying Shafi'i fiqh and you're trying to benefit from Qawa'id ibn Rajab. You'll find difficulty in trying to benefit and apply those principles, even though he mentions many principles that are in the Shafi'i madhab. It's not exactly the same, because some of the furu' and some of the masail are different, and how the Hanabila apply those principles might differ to how the Shafi'iyya apply them, right? So try and do that. That's one thing I would mention. And make sure you memorize principles, because principles will strengthen your ilm, strengthen your knowledge, and make it easier for you to grasp a lot of knowledge and solve a lot of problems. Because when the scholars, when they give rulings and they talk about issues and they solve new problems, right? It's not the fact that they've actually come across this problem and have know the adilla to it and then give you the ruling. A lot of the time they have general principles, because the Sharia, Islam, is made up of many different principles, and they have knowledge of a lot of these principles, and a lot of new rulings fall under these principles. So what they do is they see what principle applies to this specific situation, and they apply that principle to that situation, and therefore then derive a ruling. So it's very important for you to memorize principles, whether it's principles in fiqh, principles in aqeedah, principles in nahu, principles in tafseer, principles in hadith. Make sure you memorize principles, and you have specific books and notebooks whereby you go through these principles and memorize them and jot them down. So what you do then is, when it comes to qawaid fiqh, you do the same with all the other ulum. You have a book which is an advanced level book in al-qawaid al-fiqhiyah, in accordance to the madhab that you're studying, right? And on the side, you're going to have a notepad where you're going to try and benefit from the other books of qawaid al-fiqhiyah. They don't necessarily have to be in the same madhab that you're studying. You can maybe be studying the Shafi'i madhab and have al-Ishbah wal-Nadha'ir by as-Suyuti as your book that you're going to constantly revise over. But you might want to pick up al-Furuq by al-Qarafi and benefit from that which is mentioned in it. Or you might want to benefit from Qawaid ibn Rajab, even though it's not the same madhab, but you want to see how he applied the principles and what you can benefit from it and take it down, right? Because when we study these madahib, as a talib ilm, you shouldn't have ta'assub. You should not have ta'assub to these madahib. You should use them as the guidelines so you can gain knowledge and strengthen your ilm.